listening to Inner Warmup. I'm your host, Taylor Lise Morrison, founder and author of Inner Workout, ICF certified coach, and fellow journeyer. In 2017, I set out to build a life that didn't burn me out, and I found my life's work in the process. On Inner Warmup, we talk about how self-care and inner work show up in your relationships, your career, your schedule, and in the conversations you have with yourself. We get practical, we get nuanced, and we're not afraid to challenge wellness as usual. So take a deep breath and get curious. This is where your inner work begins. As we continue this monumental season of Inner Warmup, where we are exploring the connection between our mental well-being and life transitions, we're so lucky to have Tiffany Voltz as a guest today. Tiffany is a trauma therapist who travels alongside clients living with the effects of trauma and grief to be a support throughout their healing process. In addition to being a trauma therapist, somatic experiencing practitioner, and brain spotting practitioner, Tiffany is a mom, a wife, and a lifelong learner of the human spirit who holds coaching, meditation, and domestic violence advocate certifications. Tiffany is a successful midlife career transitioner who spent over 22 years as an HR and people operations executive in the Chicago tech community, where she made diversity, inclusion, belonging, vulnerability, and compassion core competencies of the organization she was a part of. In my conversation with Tiffany today, we talk about how she knew it was time for her to make that career transition, what the transition from HR leader to student to therapist looked like, and advice for finding that first role in your new career. Tiffany is such a well of wisdom and warmth. You can hear in this episode, one of the things that she said really touched me, and I'm sure that it's going to do the same for you. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Taylor, it's good to be here. Thank you.
I am genuinely so excited for this conversation. And for folks who are listening, they just heard me introduce you as a therapist. But in the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty recent switch. I know when I first met you, it was actually kind of at your point of transition where you had just resigned from a role as a chief people officer, which was the last role that you had in your career in HR. And so I kind of want to start there. How did you know that you were ready to move on from this career that you'd built in human resources?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's kind of fun to even just be brought back there because it is recent. However, it feels so far away at this point. But I feel like it was a job, a role, a career that I loved so much. And I did it for, over 22 years. And so it was in that space for quite some time. But there was a part of me, even before taking that last role, where I was like, do I want to do this role again? Am I not sure? And I was like, I think I have one more company in me. And there were some challenges that I still wanted to accomplish in that space in my career. And then as that went along for me, there just started to be this questioning that I started to have. And I think my mind and my logical and my analytical skills really won out for so much of the time that once I started to kind of let the heart get into the conversation a little bit more, it became more apparent to me that I think I need to do a switch. And I guess part of it is and maybe even just the way that I did HR was potentially a little different than is traditional. And it was so much of those one-on-one conversations with individuals in the workplace where I wasn't talking to them about being an employee. I wasn't necessarily always talking to them about some strategic employee thing or whatever that was. It was like, you are a human being in front of me with a whole lived experience. It's just not about this employee stuff, right? And so in having those conversations and letting people show up as themselves at work and understanding, we're bringing baggage from family in, we're bringing challenges from culture in, we're bringing all of these other things. It became so important to me to potentially do that in a different context and not always have kind of the company in mind as much as I loved that work. And I think I was, you still get hesitant. You're like, what is this? What is this? And being a person who is highly stretched in the role, not a lot of bandwidth, there wasn't always space. I was like, if I could just have space to think about this. But I remember I've kind of known for doing vision boarding parties with some of my close women friends every year. And I remember it so clearly. It was January 8th of 2020 where we were doing this, and just kind of thinking, like, what are the ways I want to feel less of in the year? What do I want to feel more of in this year? And these words just started to emerge for me around courage, bold. I think I had in the vision board going big and like listening to my voice. And that just occurred to me as these words and these images and these pictures were coming up. And I'm like, I'm going to do it finally. Like the heart saying it, it's loud enough. I can't quiet that down, and it's time. And I remember talking to these women who I love dearly, and they know who they are, just like, I think this is it. And it was not long after that. In fact, it was maybe a week when I officially made the decision and talked to my leadership and let them in on what I was going to do, which was going to be transitioning into therapy.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that piece of your journey with us and kind of walking us through that moment. It's interesting because as you were talking about that, it brought to mind the moment I decided to quit my full-time job, which happened for me also with a group of women. And I was on this little weekend retreat and I had maybe had an inkling that I needed to leave. And then all of a sudden it was so clear. And the word that you used there, these words started to emerge. And for me, that just brought back this imagery of like, it was present. Those words were there. They just needed a space and they needed you to be willing to listen. And you did.
Absolutely. They needed space. They needed the platform, and they needed me to listen to them too. But yeah, it was a beautiful moment of the experience and making the decision.
So you had that moment where the words emerged and like you said, you gave your heart space to talk. And then you can push back on me. My assumption is that then after that, it's like, okay, great. Heart, you made the decision. Now my mind and logistics and all of these other things need to come into play. So could you tell us a little bit more about like what had to happen between making the decision and then actually making that transition?
Well, I had to let my women friends go because I needed to have a conversation with myself about it for sure. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It was this place of, okay, this is here. This feels right to me. But how do I actually execute on this? Like, is this reality? Can I make this happen? One of the conversations was actually the first conversations I had outside of myself was with my husband, and just saying, this is what I'm thinking. It's going to involve going back to school. I don't think I want to work while I do this, right? Like, I think I want to really give this my full attention. That's kind of how I operate anyway, but I want to just like fully focus on this new thing and really embrace it for what it is. And he, which is so fortunate, was just like, yeah, absolutely. There was no kind of real question about it. It was more like, I want you to feel supported and that this makes sense for you. And so I needed to think about things like what schools would I apply to and when would I tell my job and what makes sense and how will I transition out of this role and make sure that the company is set up for success upon my departure. And so really putting all of those pieces into place were important for me. I think because I was at sort of the top of my game in HR too, it's like I was really thoughtful of the employees, my team, the company in general, and how to make this work for everyone while still keeping my needs at the forefront, I guess I would say. And so interestingly, I feel like I figured out all those things and I began to start applying. And I was like, I think I'm ready because I want to give a good amount of notice of the job. And so I gave notice in January. So about a week, maybe a week and a half or so after making the decision. And I was like, I'll give you until March, mid, late March. And I'm going to be there to craft this plan. Everything's going to be great. And the funniest part of the story for me was that I left in the pandemic. I didn't know that that was what was going to happen. But, I always kind of joke. It's like, okay, I left HR and then the pandemic happened and I don't know what to make of that as a connection. But there was a lot happening all at once. In hindsight, I feel like, it was a lot, but it was also really necessary for me. Almost that pandemic time of not needing to go anywhere and not being out and about was so healing for me in ways that I would have never imagined outside of, all of the loss and the fear and everything that was happening at that time. I was able to really sit with my decision then too, because I wasn't going anywhere. So that was an interesting piece of it. But I think what was important about that time, again, in hindsight, is you go through life sometimes, even in these jobs or careers that you mostly like. But I was so burned out. Like, I don't even know that I knew how burned out I was until I didn't have to go anywhere and felt that depletion in a way where I was like, okay, I'm starting to refuel. This feels good. Oh my gosh. Like, it was just so interesting to me where it's like, I'm not letting that happen again. Like, even in this new career, and there's lessons I learned along the way, which maybe we'll get to, but just having that, like, that push to get it done, to push through this, to do through this. It's like, I'm going to have to learn some new ways in this new career in order for this to be the thing that I kind of take to retirement or take to the end of my working career. I want to do this differently. And it gave me a lot of hope that I could, because I was finally having space to be aware of it that I hadn't had before. So yeah, lots of lessons.
Man, yeah. And hopefully, knock on wood, we don't have another pandemic. I'm wondering, would you recommend to people who are doing those transitions to try and build in some time for themselves, even if they don't feel like they need it?
Yes, because I think we are just, depending on how we are wired and all of the things that make us tick in a workplace, I feel like sometimes you don't even realize it, how much you need to refuel. Because I think, like, for me, I worked in the Chicago tech ecosystem. You just are used to kind of firing on all cylinders, and it's fun and it's exciting. And there's a lot of like awesome stuff that can come from that. But I was also a mom and a wife and a friend. And I just feel like to be able to do all those roles at the level that I was doing them took a toll on me. And so space is so great, even to just celebrate the transition as a thing that it is, right? It's a big, new, bold choice that you're making. And to go from one thing to the next it almost doesn't give it as much celebratory effect as it could have. It's like, I did this thing. And I want to fuel myself up in a way to know that I'm going to really put all of my effort and energy and creativity to this new thing in a way that inspires me and fuels me. I think having that space is wonderful. If you can do it, if you can, yes, I say go for it.
Another follow-up question as part of your story is, so you mentioned you were at the top of your game, like you were in the C-suite. If you weren't in the C-suite, how would that have impacted your decision of when to give notice as you were making that transition?
I think I would have just given less notice. I mean, I think if that really comes down to that, like I felt motivated because of where I was on the leadership team and how involved I was with strategic challenges in the business and then leading a team as well, that I just wanted to give enough time to make sure that everybody was up to speed, could transition into new roles after they just sort of accepted that this was the change that was going to happen, that there would be enough of my time to problem solve with people and to plan to make the transition smooth. And I just had a lot of responsibility. And so I wanted to make it as easeful as possible, particularly because I wasn't going to be moving right into school in March. I was going to have some of that time. So I felt like I could afford to do that and that I wanted to do that. I feel like if I was in a role that wasn't at that level, I would, of course, still want the transition to be easeful for those involved, but I don't know if I would have taken as much time. It would have definitely been a shorter notice period.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to call that out for other folks. And it sounds like the questions to consider are like, what would make this transition easeful for me? And what would make this easeful for the people that I'm working with? Because the people listening to this podcast are kind people. We don't want to burn any bridges. And also, you never know where your career is going to lead you. And so, as much as possible, you want to leave in integrity and leave places better than you found them.
Absolutely.
So let's continue your story. So you leave in March, you've got a whole pandemic, and then eventually, I mean, in the midst of the pandemic, really, you start school and you chose a new career path that involves going back to school. Some folks who are listening are thinking about career paths that may not involve getting another degree, but I think it's helpful to talk about one that involves getting a degree. I can only imagine that it's a pretty different experience to be being a chief people officer, be really involved strategically in a tech company. And then all of a sudden, you're like back to being in class and being a student and learning some new skills. So tell us just what was that transition like?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm a little tickled by it because when you say it, I'm brought back on how that really felt. I remember like sort of being excited. I was also always a person who really liked school. Like learning is sort of like, it's a place of joy for me and it's great. But in this structured way of going to grad school, it was different. But I remember being giddy, and on that first day, like, what are these professors going to be like? Who I'm going to meet? So there's some excitement to it for sure, and also a lot of fear. I would say of just, I'm an older student at this point. I mean, I think, in terms of my cohort mates, it probably ranged from those just getting out of undergrad to those of us who, this was a transition and second career. And so there were people who were older than me as well. But I think it trended towards the younger ends and just wondering like, oh my gosh, I'm in school again. Am I going to fit in? Should I be quiet? Should I contribute? Just trying to find my way. But I think what it came down to is one of the kind of core values that I have is that I'm just very, very curious. And so I just let that be what kind of brought me through, curious about my cohort mates' experiences, curious about how I was feeling on a daily basis, curious about the material, of course, too, and just letting that unfold for me in a way of, this is a career that I'm choosing, this is the schooling that I need, let's have some fun with it, let's not stress out so much. But there was, getting used to it period, I would say, of just feeling like, okay, this is the right choice. And just like feeling that we all have something valuable, I think, to contribute to a conversation. Once you have that as your kind of foundation, I think other things just fall into place, which is nice. But we had some really great professors and, came in contact with a group of people that, I still, are close today. We still meet regularly, my counseling queens, and we just help each other out and support each other. And it's been a really great experience from that. But yeah, it's definitely a transition going back to the school grind and kind of finding my place.
So I'm hearing some things that you did. I'm not surprised about this, just knowing you, but you were really, it's almost like you had metacognition about the process as it was happening. And you're being really mindful about how you wanted to show up and engage with this transition. I'm also hearing you talk about your counseling queens. And so it sounds like you created or sought out community. As you look back at that version of yourself who was just going into her first couple of semesters of grad school, what's the advice that you would give her?
You belong here. I think it's as simple as that. It's you belong here, and just show up as you, and that's going to be okay. Be curious, and you belong here.
Well, Tiffany, I did not expect to tear up on this interview. Something about that just really struck a chord with me. I've mentioned it some places. I haven't fully said it, but I'm starting a part-time PhD program and I have a lot of feelings about it. But that reminder that we belong places, and whether your career switch involves going back to school or you're just going in a different industry. And a lot of times when you're switching careers, there's this gap where people are younger than you, but have more experience than you in these different places. So that reminder of you belong here is something I personally needed to hear that truly struck a chord with me. And I'm hoping for other people that you just take a moment and internalize that for yourself, whatever that means for your situation right now.
Yeah, take it in, Taylor.
I didn't expect to have my own therapy session today.
It's funny how that happens, right?
I do want to loop back on for a second because I talked about your transitioning from HR to therapy and why you wanted to make a transition, but I didn't actually ask you why therapy.
Oh, yeah. I think I just have this viewpoint about people that if they're just given a container with which to kind of feel safe enough to explore their just honest truths, that they can do such remarkable things. And I think I found that even in HR, when we really started to talk about things and what made people tick and all of that, they would make the best decisions for themselves, for their companies, for the people in their lives. But like just having that non-judgmental space to do it was just not always there for them, or they felt even sometimes therapy is so much, it's like, well, then I have a problem, or there's a diagnosis, or there's all of this. Like sometimes it's just space to talk, right? And to allow ourselves to be honest without necessarily even needing to make a decision. I think that's super important too. Like I know I fall into that habit. It's like once I know, then I got to do something about it. It's like, no, not necessarily. But now I know, and when I have space to do something about it, I can. And so just being able to work with people, to get to know themselves better, and to build that self-trust was really, really important to me in the work that I did in HR. And I was like, I think therapy is the best context for me to do this in. And the idea of the ripple effects that can happen for somebody who is allowed that and is just free to be truthful, not even to the world, but like to themselves. So many of us aren't necessarily truthful to ourselves because we're afraid of what that might mean. And so being able to be that for someone became the draw for me, to just say it out loud. There's so many therapy sessions that I'm just saying, it's like, okay, I think I feel something coming out. Like, I know you want to say something. Just say it. What would that feel like? Well, how liberating would that be? And I actually work with a big portion of my caseload is trauma. I'm trained specifically in trauma therapy. And to even think that you can be playful and creative and joyful in trauma is a weird thing potentially, but it's actually the thing that some clients embrace the most. If you're navigating through trauma, that means you're not generally having fun. And so how do we bring that back into our worlds as a way that that's just like our birthright, to be joyful and to have fun and to play and have creativity. And so that became really, really important to me as well. And there were aspects of therapy too that, whereas talk therapy is certainly a piece of the work that I do, it's bringing the body into the therapy experience. And Some of us have very challenging relationships with our bodies for all the good reasons. And to be able to be a part of somebody's journey with that, where we can listen to what the body is telling us and use that as a means to heal, it all was like, this is what I have to do. This is definitely what I have to do. And I'm just so grateful that I get to do this every day.
Thank you for sharing that piece of your experience with us. And it's just so clear as I'm lucky I get to see you talking about it, but you can hear it in your voice too, that you have this conviction about the work that you're here to do, especially through therapy. I'm wondering, what's been the most surprising part of this transition for you?
I feel like there was, I will admit, this little bit of fear that I would just take all of these stories and all of these challenges and everything that my beautiful clients are going through and like take them through my world and through my experience, and that could be a difficult thing to navigate. I think in therapy you hear a lot about vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, all of these things, right? And so I think because I was fully aware of it, and I don't know if we're talking about it more now in therapy training and grad programs potentially, but it was something that I was like, oh, is that going to happen? Because I came from this career feeling very fatigued and very burned out. But I'm finding that it's just not the same. And so it's a good surprise, I would say, where it's like I can hear these stories of people's, inner struggles and challenges and be so attuned to those individuals and then still leave that there with them so that I can come back to it. Like I'm not taking it to my family and I'm not taking it to my friends. I'm tired, like we'll say that, but it's just a different thing. There's just I feel such a reward with the work that I think it's a very good balance for me to go through those, those challenging times with clients, but see them getting better, seeing them thriving, seeing them just feel safe enough. At the end of the day, that's kind of what it is, and building that trusting relationship. And I just wouldn't trade it for anything at this point. And so I'm glad it hasn't taken me in a direction that I was a little bit fearful of because of my own patterns and behaviors and tendencies. But I feel like I've been better boundaried with it, which is really, really great. And just so enjoying the work. So rewarding.
I love this for you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
So I want to tap back into just a little bit of your HR knowledge for a moment, because one of the hardest parts when you're switching careers is just getting your foot in the door for the next career. And I would guess it's a little bit different for therapy, as we have a shortage of therapists. We need a lot of therapists to work and to do the good work that you do. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how people could land that first role as they're transitioning into a new career.
Yeah, I think that there's a part of it that starts off internally within first, and that's a little bit of confidence, because I think we sell ourselves short. And I guess what I mean by that is, I think as a therapist, it's a new role, but there's many aspects of that role that I've been doing in my former career, if not my whole life. And being able to sort of say like, okay, this is a new title, maybe a new industry, maybe it's a change, but there's probably some overlap. And being able to be aware of that and then feel confident in that like, oh, I can speak to those things. Like I can speak to my empathy skills and my active listening and, all of those things as a therapist, because that's how I did my job before. So I think that's really important. Where's the overlap that you can say, like, I've actually been doing this in a different context, and this is how I might apply it in the new role, in the new career. I think it's also important before kind of right away jumping into the new role or career transition is that you start to talk to people who are doing the work that you want to be doing. I think that's really, really helpful. because you get a sense, you start to build a network. And then when you're ready, because you've done a training or a boot camp or whatever it is, you've already talked to people. It's not sort of like, okay, I'm done now. How am I going to find this new role? Start to interview people. What is this role like for you? What do you like about it? And start to build your network. And it can kind of feel, networking is that word where people feel like, I'm not a networker, but have it more so be just this curiosity piece again. Like, this is a field that I'm interested in, and I'm just curious, how did you get into it? Like, just have it be conversations. It doesn't have to be so outcome based. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to, HR heads who are thinking about therapy at this point. They like see me on LinkedIn. It's like, would you have a quick conversation? And I'm always saying yes, because I think it's really important to know other people who are doing a similar thing. So don't be afraid of that. Start to research people and start to reach out to them, because I think you might be surprised. There are people who are willing to talk about their story, and that'll help you along the way. And then that's a lead for you, someone to reach out to when you're ready to make the actual leap.
Thank you for that advice. The confidence, and to use a very HRE term, but like finding those transferable skills and understanding that things that you do can still apply. Like, I think of one of my friends and a former inner workout employee who had a whole career in childcare and now works in marketing. And you'd be surprised the number of transferable skills and being creative and being improvisational and these different things that she's been able to make connections. And I really want to underscore that for people listening who are like, well, my career shift, there are no transferable skills. I promise you there's at least one.
At least one, probably 5, but at least one. Yeah, I agree.
And then, the talking to people, like having those conversations. I was going to say worst case scenario, but it's not even worst case scenario. You might have a conversation and get closer to, this is what it would actually look like for me to do this career. And I don't want that. And what a gift to then not quit your job and not go into these other things. I also see other people who have had conversations and realize, oh, I thought I wanted this thing, but I actually want this other thing that I didn't even know the name of. And I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have had the conversation.
So true. I agree with that. And you're right. It's not worst case. If you learn something that says that's not for me, I call that a win. For sure. For sure.
Yes, it's a win. It's a gift. And this whole conversation, honestly, was such a gift. Thank you for being willing to share your experience and some of what it was like for you to go through these transitions. If people want to stay connected with you, what's the best way for them to do that, Tiffany?
Yeah, I feel like LinkedIn is kind of the way. Like, that's the easiest way. I am in a therapy practice, and so depending on what they want to connect with me for, it would depend. But if it's about sort of this career transition phase or season or period for them, fine. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tiffany Voltz, and I'm happy to have those conversations with people.
Awesome. We will make sure that is linked in the show notes. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for being generous with your time, especially when you are often being so generous with your time with other people. I appreciate you sharing a little sliver of it here.
Oh, thank you, Taylor. It was a pleasure.
Inner Warmup is a collaborative effort. It's hosted by me, Taylor Elise Morrison. Danielle Spalding provides production support, and it's edited by Carolina Duque. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. And if you're looking to continue your inner work, our free Take Care assessment is a great place to start. On that note, take care.